Today we're doing a quick comparison of the Sigma FP to the new FPL and talk about my thoughts about the FPL. But first, if you're new to the channel, my name is Anson, and on this channel we talk about filmmaking, specifically budget gear, tutorials, and a behind the scenes look at the projects that I'm working on. So if that's something you're into, consider subscribing. Now before I get too far into it, I do want to mention that Sigma did send me the FPL to test, but they're not requiring I say anything specifically, and so you can get my full and honest opinion. And since I'm an owner of the original FP, I wanted to take an opportunity to not only talk about my thoughts on the FPL, but do a little bit of comparison between the FPL and the FP. So that's what we're going to do here today. Now a lot of this comparison is going to be footage comparison, so you can see for yourself the image quality from the FP to the FPL and kind of take what you want from that. And while you look at that footage, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the FPL and if you should upgrade to the FPL from the original FP. Now in comparing these two cameras, I'm going to go ahead and say these are almost identical for video shooters. For the most part, the FPL is going to be everything you got from the FP, for good and for bad. And so catching us all up on how I feel about the FP, ultimately the FPL, the pros for me on the FP is it's a compact, low light beast with amazing color science and the ability to shoot cinema DNG RAW. And that is still true with the FPL. Now the cons I had for the FP originally was the overall IO options that it offers. That as well is still plaguing the FPL. So as a videographer or a filmmaker, you're still gonna be limited on overall IO for the FPL, and so that really hasn't changed. And so that kind of catches us all up on how I feel about the FP, but what do you get with the FPL that may be different? And that's where it comes down to the difference of the sensor, as well as one other key feature that I think goes very much unnoticed in any review that I've seen. So the first thing that you'll start to see that you'll get from the FPL, but you will not get from the FP, is the sensor is a little bit different. It's a 61 megapixel sensor. Now while the higher megapixels may be better for photographers, especially photographers that print their work, the 61 megapixels does something also a little bit different for filmmakers or videographers. With that 61 megapixel sensor, you do have the ability to zoom in on the sensor when you're using the FPL. With the FP, you had the ability to go into Super 35 mode. Now with the FPL, you can go into Super 35, and even in the Micro Four Thirds range, if you're at 1080, you can go up to a 5x crop, which crops in on the sensor, so it zooms in on your shot a lot more, which that's an advantage to event videographers, because if you're filming an event, you can actually punch in on the sensor if your lens can't get you the reach that you want, so that's really an advantage for those types of videographers. Now in 4K you can go up to 2.5x crop, which again is beyond Micro Four Thirds, which is really awesome. And so depending on how much reach you'll need, you can go into 1080 and get a larger crop, but if you're in 4K you can still do a pretty sizable crop as well. Now the 61 megapixel sensor is not all positive. I saw in a lot of reviews that it does have a really bad rolling shutter problem, and I can attest, it really does. And so while the extra crop is really nice, the rolling shutter can be a deal breaker for some people. And then the other big upgrade for me is the fact that now the USB-C port does allow you to charge while you're filming. Now charging while filming may be a small thing for some people, but for some it actually is really important. If you do stream live events, if you are a live event videographer, having the ability to charge while filming is going to be helpful for a lot of people. And so if that's you and you need that type of setup, then the FPL may be the better option to go with over the FP. So those are some of the bigger upgrades that I've noticed as a filmmaker, as a videographer with the FPL. Now, does that mean that you should spend an extra, what, $700 to $800 to buy the FPL? Well, I can't really decide that. Only you can decide that. If those two features are amazing features and it's worth the price tag for you, then by all means, definitely go with the FPL. But if those aren't a factor for you, then just stick with the original FP. It's an amazing camera. You get a lot of the same qualities that you do from the FPL and a little bit better rolling shutter than you would with the FPL. So those are my thoughts on the FPL and maybe a little bit of comparison with the FP. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you guys think this camera is worth the upgrade? Do you think it's worth the price tag that it is? Let me know in the comments below. So that's it for me. As always, thank you guys for joining. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Stay safe, be happy, support each other. Wash those hands, and I'll see you here next time. Peace.